Just ahead on One Detroit, let the budget battle begin. The governor's plan for spending on roads and schools, plus 1 month until the Michigan primary. Which candidates will be left? Nolan and Stephen debate coming up. Plus new ways to engage young people in the census, and record lake levels are impacting shorelines around Michigan and could cost us millions. A special Great Lakes Now report. I'm Christy McDonald. We're at the High Grade Deli in Detroit. Join us for One Detroit coming up.
Support for this program provided by W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. And thank you to these supporters. And viewers like you.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much to the High Grade Deli for serving up some great sandwiches for us while we take on the biggest stories of the week. We'll take a look at a push to get more young people engaged in the census and an in-depth report on lake levels that could cost the state millions. But we are starting with some politics. The primary is a month away. The budget is being debated in Lansing. So say hello to our One Detroit contributors, Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. Guys, I take you to all the nice places and get you lunch on top of it. I mean, there's no other way to talk politics besides a good sandwich. This is my Reuben, and you cannot have any of it. Well, maybe if you're good, I can cut it in half a little bit. I can, exactly.
That's a big sandwich.
All right, well, let's go ahead and start talking a little bit of politics. We are about a month away now from Michigan's primary. We're watching everything that's happening around the rest of the country. All right, I'm going to start with you, Stephen. What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I think you can't talk about the primary anymore without talking about Mike Bloomberg and what role he might play beginning in states like Michigan. He's not going to show up until later in the cycle. He's sitting out Iowa and New Hampshire. He'll sit out South Carolina and Nevada and then jump into the race. And by the time they get here, it could be close. I mean, his support seems to be moving upward, even though he's not technically in the race yet. He's not debating. He's not on the ballot in the states that are holding primaries. But it's fascinating to watch. I mean, it's fascinating and horrifying all at the same time, right? This guy buying his way onto the ballot is somewhat problematic. But if you look at the rest of the field and the things that are going wrong for them, it's hard to say that they don't need a candidate who's got a little more together and is a little more organized and has the money to take on the president.
And that's what you're really talking about, the role that he's going to play, the role that the money and that kind of financing and pushing the message out. No.
We've never seen this much money spent. And, you know, he had a little preview of it in 2018 when he bought the Virginia legislature. I mean, we have never seen transactional politics at this level. I mean, he bought that legislature. They proceeded to enact his agenda. And now he's spending the same kind of money, much, much more. I think he's spending about $100 million a month almost on his own campaign.
I can't even wrap my head around how you spend that.
It is, and it's his money he's spending. It's why you haven't seen him on the debate stage, because he doesn't have the broad base of donor support that the Democrats require. They're going to have to back off that soon, because if you look at his progress up the polls, I mean, he's getting into that 13-15% range without having appeared on a debate stage. I think he's the force to be reckoned with, strictly because of that money. And you know, in my mind, he would be a pretty decent choice for Republicans who are disillusioned with Trump. If he just keep his hands off our guns and big gulps, this nanny tendency of his. is unappealing to a lot of conservatives.
Yeah, but I would think that this is pretty disillusioning, though, to people to saying, if I don't have this kind of money, there's no way ever that candidates can make it this far.
It's the system we've allowed to develop. I mean, if you look at the way that we have backed off campaign finance laws that we used to have, the way that Citizens United changed the playing field, conservatives cheered that when it happened. Now they're upset because the person who's probably going to take the most advantage of it is a Democrat, or at least a Democrat now. I mean, the idea of Mike Bloomberg being a Democrat is debatable too.
Sure,
he used
not
to
a
be a
Republican.
Republican. Well, I mean, maybe he's neither.
Maybe that's what people want.
But what's really interesting about him is, Nolan says, look, he's got to keep his hands off our guns and our big gulps. I think if you sit on the other side of the political spectrum, you're most fearful of stop and frisk. I mean, the really aggressive policing that he not only debuted in New York, but doubled down on over and over again, even when it was clear that it had a disproportionate effect on African Americans and made the city intolerable for a lot of people. I mean, he's got criticism that will come at him from both sides, very strong.
And that's interesting that you bring that up, because there's been so much conversation about Democratic candidates not having a connection with the African American community. You see all the front runners right now who seem to be arguing on stage, oh no, I have African American support, I have black support, and it seems a little tone deaf coming from a lot of white men standing on a stage and saying, no, I'm really the one that's going to have the support. Do you see that as a huge problem for Democrats right now?
Well, I think Joe Biden will, traditionally he has done very well with African Americans, and they will play a very large role in deciding the ultimate candidate. He does well with older voters and older Democratic voters and black Democratic voters, and those are key constituencies. I wouldn't count, Joe Biden's been slipping. I think once this primary season goes to the South, Joe Biden's in pretty good shape.
He will do better. Presumably, he will do better.
I think he will if he can hang on.
The problem is you have to not get wiped out in those early contests, because that does tend to affect turnout in those later states.
So let me ask you about this then. So with all the fits and starts of the early primary states, do you think that we're going to see a change or a move up of where Michigan lies in the entire primary rollout of states?
Going forward?
Yeah, going forward after this year.
There's a better case to be made now than ever that the way we're doing it doesn't make a lot of sense and it doesn't work. The question is, what else do you do? I mean, that's always been the sticking point, and everybody wants to go first. I have always thought, and I can remember writing back in, 08 or 9 when this came up before, that the smartest way to do it seems to me to divide the country into regions and pick a state from each region to go first together each time. You could rotate the states, you could rotate the regions. There are lots of ways to make sure that it's not one state. The idea that one state should go first, I think, is kind of silly anyway.
You have, for a year or more, up to 2 years, these candidates camping out in Iowa and New Hampshire. It makes no sense. If you had cluster primaries, it doesn't have to be regional. You can draw a state from each region.
From each region, right,
Look for diverse states. Force these candidates early on to campaign nationwide and not just say, gosh, if I can win in New Hampshire, I can win in Iowa, then I've got momentum. That hasn't necessarily proved true either. I mean, you think about the candidates who have won Iowa, not all of them have gone on to win the nominations.
I mean, it proved important for Barack Obama, right? I mean, that candidacy dies if it doesn't do well. In those early primaries, but it didn't help Huckabee at all. It killed Rick Santorum in, what was that, 12, I think. It's all over the map, and it's an odd state. I mean, not odd in the sense of being strange, but odd in the sense of being not like other places. I mean, it is a very distinct population that doesn't sort of reflect so much else of the country.
Right. So let's look at Michigan in this next month. What are we planning, besides seeing a lot of Mike Bloomberg ads? What are we going to be seeing now from candidates in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I don't think they're going to get here for a couple of weeks. I think they're going to have their hands full with the Super Tuesday states. I think you'll see a huge surge of candidates into Michigan in the week, 10 days before the primary, but I don't expect to see a whole lot of them here.
Typically, we don't play that big of a role in the primary. I mean, it matters in the sense that there's delegates up for for grabs, but it's not like these other states. And because we're behind Super Tuesday, often you have somebody who's already got so much momentum that it doesn't matter, and we tend to pick somebody who's not going to win
that's
anyway.
what we're saying. We are so eccentric in our primary choices.
But I
Bernie
think
Sanders, John McCain.
on both sides of this.
On both sides of the political spectrum. But I think that argues so strongly for Bloomberg here. I mean, I think it would be really interesting if he didn't win in Michigan, both given that history and given the amount of money he's already focused on this state.
And what will Republicans do here? I mean, will they cross over? Because I mean, they don't have a real primary. So will they cross over? And if they do, who will they vote for?
That's an interesting question too, right?
All right, a budget debate going on in Lansing. Everyone's got to have a budget. So tell us about ours and what the governor has put out. Stephen, what do you think, and what's notable standing out right now?
So when I saw the budget, one of the first thoughts I had was that this was the budget that we were supposed to see from Rick Snyder in that late second term, right? When he won in 2010, he talked about how there was time to tighten the belt and do some things to get the economy going again, grow jobs, and then there would be an investment agenda, and that some of the cuts that he'd made to things like education and higher ed and other things like that would go back. He never did that, and I think it's a real shame that he didn't. He had reasons why. I think in the end he set the state back by not doing it. Whitmer is saying, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and reinvest in these things that actually open up opportunity and close the inequality gap that is really becoming a real problem in Michigan.
So if this is the reinvestment agenda, is she reinvesting in the right places?
Well,
Nolan?
I'm not sure I would agree with that characterization, and particularly on roads. I mean, this borrowing on roads, we've talked about that's probably the only thing she could have done to get an immediate infusion of money into roads, except, she has completely dismissed the Republican idea that we can find money elsewhere in this budget to put into roads. Maybe not all of it, but we can find some money, and we maybe should start using that sales tax money for roads. She's completely ignored that, which seems to me she's going to have problems getting this through the Republican legislature again. And I fear we're going to go right down to the wire again, and there's going to be another round of vetoes, and we're not going to have a functional governing process when it comes to the budget.
The spending on education, for instance. I mean, that's something we have needed to do for a long time. Snyder never put that money in the budget to begin with.
Snyder raised education spending by a lot, perhaps not enough.
Actually, he didn't.
But overall education spending went up during
He did it by putting money into their pensions, but the per pupil allocation,
which saved money for the school districts.
But the per pupil allocation was so low by the time he left office, and we are behind on that.
His last 4 years, he raised every year the per pupil allocation, and taking care of that pension allocation. If she moves
it's not a small
away
thing.
from that, I mean, that puts school districts in a lot of trouble. But you have to also bring with it some spending accountability. Are we just going to spend more money to get the same results? Because our results are pretty dismal. And so what are we going to do in terms of making sure we're spending money better? Are they bad because of the money, or is the money going to make them better?
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there and keep watching and waiting. All right, thanks so much, guys. The push to get people engaged with the 2020 census this spring is intensifying. Thousands need to be hired and trained to collect census data, and the job can pay up to $24 an hour. At the Wayne County Community College District's downtown campus this past week, the focus was on motivating hundreds of high school students. It was a rally to get them to be counted and for those turning 18 this year to register to vote. Wayne County officials hope they'll understand their importance in the process and to really get their friends and their family to participate too. In a move to connect with younger people, Detroit native Arkisha Knight, nationally known as rapper Kash Doll, performed and emphasized the importance of being counted.
I want Tiffany, I want Anderson. Everybody counts. Everybody. So when you see those letters that come to your home, do not let your mommy and daddy throw them out. You have to let them know that this matters.
We need the services that Wayne County needs, that Detroit needs, depends on that census. And so we're pulling out basically all the troops, and the young people are a very important part of that number.
And for the first time, people can also participate in the census online. There is concern counting in Detroit will be a challenge based on the past participation rate. Low census count means the loss of millions of federal dollars for the region. We'll continue to cover efforts on the census in our area. Just head to onedetroitpbs.org for much more. All right, turning now to water levels in the Great Lakes that could cost us millions here in Michigan. New numbers out this week show lake levels are even higher this year than in 2019, the highest January numbers in 30 years. From cottages washed away to roads, eroding beaches, and flooded historic places like Fishtown and Leland, townships and homeowners around the state are trying to figure out how to deal with rising water and the fact that it may get worse this spring. Here's a closer look from Great Lakes Now.
Mark Torregrossa is the chief meteorologist for the news site MLive, which has covered the effects of the high water throughout 2019 and into 2020. Some parts of the Great Lakes region have had their wettest water year on record. What's a water year?
You know, we think of a calendar year, January 1st. Some accountants would do fiscal year. A water year starts November 1st and it ends the next year, October 31st, because a lot of the snow that we get November, December doesn't turn into water into the watershed until it melts sometime in March or April. So we use that late fall precipitation and the snow, November and December, to add on to the water the next year.
In much of the Great Lakes Basin, the water year ending in 2019 has been among the wettest on record, and it all winds up in the lakes.
This year, all of the Great Lakes except Lake Michigan and Huron set record high water levels, mostly in the summer. Some of the Great Lakes were at record high levels for several months.
Many communities on Michigan's western shore have been hit with erosion and flooding. In Leland, on the Leelanau Peninsula, Fishtown is a collection of historic fishing shanties that's both a tourist destination and a working waterfront. Some of the shanties still house commercial fishing operations. The record high water posed an obvious threat to shanties built on pilings.
Two of the shanties, including one that houses the business called the Village Cheese Shanty. It's a beloved sandwich shop. Water was getting into the business. And then our oldest shanty from 1903 called the Moore Shanty. All last year, it just had water anywhere from this deep to several feet deep in it.
The Fishtown Preservation Society, a nonprofit that owns the shanties, has begun work to protect the most vulnerable structures.
We are working in the wintertime to lift those buildings that we lift up out of Fishtown, set back on parking lots, and then the foundations will be fixed. The buildings will then be brought back to the exact locations, but they'll be anywhere from 12 to 16 inches higher than they were.
In Fishtown and elsewhere, responding to the high water is proving to be expensive.
The projects that we're working on, the estimates are at $2.5 million, so there's a lot of fundraising to be done.
In Pentwater, persistent flooding caused by the high water forced the closure of Long Bridge Road on May 1st. Tourists and residents had to take a 9-mile detour. Lynn Moore is a reporter with MLive and the Muskegon Chronicle.
The village actually implemented its own ferry service using an old naval boat, and that helped in the summer, but they knew that they needed a longer-term solution, and they got pretty creative with a structure they actually referred to as a burrito.
On top of the existing road, workers added limestone wrapped in a heavy-duty plastic fabric and paved over that with asphalt.
And they actually were able to raise that road several feet, and it was reopened this fall. But they had to get creative with both of their solutions, the taxi service as well as the burrito road.
Fall storms made erosion an even greater concern, especially one that arrived on October 16th, packing winds that approached 60 miles an hour in places.
The National Weather Service, NOAA, figures that was the most destructive storm to the sand dunes of western Michigan since about 1986. And they found a spot where they think that about 30 feet of the sand dune collapsed and went into the lake just in about 12 hours.
Seeing that kind of erosion and anticipating more, homeowners were left with few appealing options.
The things that people are really turning to protect their properties are the seawalls, either steel seawalls or rock revetments, or moving their structures. As the erosion encroaches closer and closer on their homes, they've had to make some real tough decisions, and they're not cheap. People were getting frantic. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands of dollars on protections, seawall protections for their properties.
Corey Morse is one of MLive's photojournalists. He visited one home just north of Holland, Michigan several times. The first time, the house's door opened onto a cliff. The second time, things had gotten even worse.
The floor had just like fallen out, and it really was going to go over the edge. I mean, it already had started to. There was like a debris field down below, not even just like from the house, but like trees that like had been like rooted there, and all of a sudden like it's falling over.
The next time Morse visited, the house had been demolished before erosion could send it tumbling toward the lake.
If they hadn't demolished it, it was going to absolutely go over the edge.
At least one other lakeshore cottage didn't fare as well. On New Year's Eve 2019, erosion claimed this home near Montague.
This was a cottage that's been in this family for generations. The woman who actually owns it now began efforts to save the structure several months ago. She knew that the beach, was being eroded, that the bluff that the home sat on was being eroded. She lives on the other side of the state, so she worried about her home, but she couldn't, she didn't know how quickly that bluff was eroding until one evening her neighbor called and said, "I'm sorry to tell you, your home went off the edge." Saving the house, ultimately, it was beyond what she was capable of doing.
I mean, it's just amazing, like, to see a house just literally fall over into the lake. It's quite a sight to actually see a house go over.
Current forecasts don't show lake levels going down anytime soon.
Well, we're told by city and state officials that there's no real end in sight with the high water levels, and unfortunately they can't tell us whether they're going to recede much at all. Nobody knows what the future holds, and I think that's scary for people as sort of a wait and see sort of proposition.
I definitely really feel for them and hope that everybody can hopefully save their houses. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty around here too, like, how high are the water levels going to get? If the water levels did keep rising, I mean, there's going to be a lot more houses at risk for sure.
We're still in a wet pattern. And until the overall hemispheric weather pattern changes and we go back to something drier than normal, we got to expect the lake levels will continue to go up. It just all depends on how much Mother Nature rains on us. If she continues to do excessive flooding rainfall, we'll see lake levels we haven't seen in modern history.
Make sure you follow Great Lakes Now for more reporting on lake levels, and you can find all of our stories at onedetroitpbs.org. That is going to do it for us this week on One Detroit. Next week, join us for an hour-long special looking at the Ford train station project in Detroit and the surrounding neighborhoods it will impact. Get to know Corktown, North Corktown, and Hubbard Richard, and hear how residents are getting input into how the project will change their communities. That's on a special One Detroit American Black Journal Roadshow next Thursday at 7 p.m. Thanks so much to the High Grade Deli for having us today, and here's a little bit more on their story. We'll see you next week. Take care.
High Grade Deli started down the street in the old Western Market, which was on 20th and Michigan Avenue, and through the 50s and the 60s. And then in about the middle of the 1960s, when they had to knock the market down to build the I-75 freeway. When they did that, the original owner located to where we are right now.
Who's your clientele now?
We get a little bit of everybody. Professional people, blue-collar people, a lot of construction workers, especially with things going on in the area with construction, a lot of neighborhood people.
And most of your customers long-term? You see them day after day or week after week?
So we see them, and sometimes twice a day.
No kidding. You
Yes.
serve breakfast too?
Yes, breakfast and lunch only.
Okay.
We're not open for dinner.
What's most popular items on your menu?
Well, we specialize in corned beef, and our grilled Reuben sandwich is our signature sandwich. We sell probably the most of any sandwich, corned beef wise, is the Reuben. It's we push it, and we get great reviews on it. It's quite well known here. There's challenges every day. There's challenges every day with running a business, any kind of business, and what really can make the day is having a really super busy day and getting through it and know that you did the job and you did it well. You got your customers served in a reasonable amount of time and they all enjoyed it.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.
Support for this program provided by W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. And thank you to these supporters. And viewers like you.